All right, back to free cash flow and cash flows. We looked at free cash flow and how to calculate it in the prior video. Let's take a look at what this looks like in practice. In practice, when you're doing projects can get delayed. Economic reasons. Well, you might have a recession, things are going bad. Political reasons, governments can add taxes, they can impose regulations. During the coronavirus, we've got both kind of economic and health reasons. And political. It's kind of a mess. And it can be due to technology. Projects can be delayed because the technology is not working or the technology isn't developing as much as we want. We might want a hydrogen car out there very fast, but it's not easy to develop. And projects as they go along might get bigger. Right? Digging a tunnel between New York and New Jersey, well, as you get going, you find, well, let's make it a little wider. Instead of having one train track, let's have two. Or let's have a car lane. Things tend to grow, particularly the longer they get, the bigger they grow. And projects can get canceled for a lot of the same reasons as up above. The regulations may come in, the project may become too expensive to do, and maybe the technology just doesn't work. Maybe we don't have the capacity to do the things we want. So projects in practice are a lot more complex than just saying, oh, let's take a present value and see how that looks. Projects also carry different amounts of risk. Every project on its own has a certain level of risk and uncertainty. Uncertainty in the sense that there may be things we never thought about. Certainly, if you're working a construction project or doing a home remodel and all of a sudden the coronavirus hits, you didn't count on that. There was no plan. There was no contingency plan for that. You have risks. Let's stick with home improvement. You're going to take down a wall. Oops, it's a load-bearing wall. Oops, things happen, right? Oops, you find out there's structural issues you didn't think of before, or water damage you didn't think of. So all projects have a certain level of risk. That risk contributes to the firm's risk. And what you can do is diversify yourself. So if I undertake multiple projects, I reduce my risk. If I have different types of cars, I reduce the risk that one car might be a failure with other cars. Same thing with shoes or any kind of project. As I add more projects, it diversifies the firm's risk. Well, we also have systematic risk. This is what the shareholder looks at. And in this case, I can diversify some risk from the shareholder by other investments. If I'm worried about the shoe industry, maybe I get into food or something like that as an investor. Now, the text talks about the fact that an investor and firms should only theoretically worry about the firm should only worry about its idiosyncratic risk, its particular risk, and only the investor should worry about systematic risk, and that they can cover the different idiosyncratic risks of the firms. Yeah, but if you're in a firm, that's not the way you think. If you're worried about the shoe industry, you might want to get into food or something else. That's a little extreme, but you might want to diversify yourself. You're acting in your own interests. This is sort of an agency problem. If I'm a project manager, of course I want to diversify myself. I don't want to have all the risk in one project. So the individuals in a firm operate a little bit differently than one might say systematically. Let me put it another way. If I want to diversify as an investor, I will buy the firms that I want to diversify into. I shouldn't be having the firms themselves make those decisions. But again, that's a theoretical view. Now, capital budgeting. We talked about cost of capital. We talked about the fact that different projects have different risks, and we need to incorporate those risks into our calculation of the cost of capital. Greater risk requires a greater return. Now, how do we calculate systematic risk? Well, we can do a couple ways. First of all, we're going to look at the beta for the project. But it's a new project. We have nothing to look at. There's no historical basis for comparison in our own business. But we can take a look at some other benchmark, or we can use a project that, or another business that's in something that we do. So if we're going to get into the athletic apparel business, well, we can look at the beta for a Nike. If we're going to look at the grocery business, if you're Amazon and you're going to get into the grocery business, look at the beta for the grocery business. Maybe I should say a little bit more about option one. In option one, we did projects in the past, and we set a benchmark, and we could see how we did relative to those benchmarks. Did we exceed them? Did we not exceed them? What kind of risks were there? And we can look at our own internal results of different sorts of things within our division, even though they might not be exactly the same as this project, and use those to calculate a beta for the project. Another method for evaluating the risk of a firm is to use simulations. There are a lot of factors, and each have risks. How big is the market growing? Well, what's the standard deviation of our projected market growth or the market share? What do we think is happening to costs? Well, we might have projected something for oil prices, but that may change. All of these are variable and unpredictable. They might have a probability associated with them. And so we can use those probabilities in creating a simulation. And we create a scenario. So for each of these variables, the market size, the market share, and costs, we pick a value in the simulation. And we compute a result. We get an internal rate of return or a net present value for one scenario. Well, now let's try that with a different market size or a different share or different costs. And we can do, again, calculate the result of what that would look like and get internal rate of return or net present value. We can do this over and over thousands of times, and we'll get a distribution. We might get a normal distribution. We might get let me draw. We might get a normal distribution. I'm drawing left-handed. Or we could get some other distribution. Right? But we can then take a look and have an idea of what we believe our outcome will be. We get a probability distribution for our internal rate of return. And we can use that in evaluating the risk relative to the return of a project. So we might get a distribution that looks like this. This is what we will use as our net present value, knowing that this is our risk. I think in practice, this is a good thing to do, but very few businesses do this. I think it's used a lot in financial scenarios. It's certainly used a lot. We call these Monte Carlo simulations. But in projects, typically people take estimates, their best estimates, and use a simple net present value or internal rate of return.